more than 300,000 protesters taking to the streets in the 10th consecutive week of anti-government demonstrations. Organizers say they believe the figure is actually closer to 500,000 demonstrators against the government's efforts to radically overhaul the judicial system. The protests were held as the coalition now prepares to go through with its highly contentious legislation. They've rejected pleas from the president to freeze the moves, as there have been several compromise proposals published in the media, but currently none of them seem to be quite realistic. Organizers say they would increase their response if the government doesn't shelve the move, with a planned day of escalating resistance declared for Thursday. Let's take a listen now to some of those protesters.
We believe that if the court cannot defend the people, and that it just depends on the government, the government can do everything, and it's what we call the dictatorship.
Stop what is going now in the name of private things and not of the country. To stop it immediately and to change all what happens now. No, it's not a matter of elections. The elections were as they were. It's a matter of doing things in the name of Bibi's crime.
The first to get discriminated by this government are women. This is a very extreme religious government. They don't hide the fact that they believe that women have to stay in the kitchen, they have to bring children to the world. They should not have any power of position in the government, in the army, things that in Israel, especially in Tel Aviv, we're not used to. We're very frightened of it.
Well, Israeli Police Commissioner Kobi Shabtai says that he made a mistake in approving the removal of the Tel Aviv district's police commander. He also indicated that he'd considered resigning amid the uproar caused by the move, but he decided not to in the end. Protesters, former police chiefs, and reportedly current top officers accused the commissioner of succumbing to political pressure and demanded that he resign. National Security Minister and right-wing leader Itamar Ben-Gvir initially instructed the police chief to do so, but the move was immediately frozen by the Attorney General, who said there were concerns due to a breach of the minister's permitted behaviors. Speaking on Khan News after Kobi Shabtai's statements, Itamar Ben-Gvir said that the Attorney General is actually the one governing the commissioner, adding that she is, quote, the problem. Let's bring in Daniel Sheck, the former Israeli ambassador to France, joining us live in studio this morning. Daniel, let's talk about the judicial overhaul bills. First, one side continuing with the legislation, that's the coalition. The other side asking for compromises, the Israeli president also unveiling a plan for compromises. How far can this really go?
Well, it could go all the way to a showdown, which nobody can predict how it will happen. But in theory, if the legislation goes through in the second and third reading and becomes law, immediately the Supreme Court will be petitioned. The Supreme Court is most likely to strike down this legislation. So then the question is, what do the government branches do? Do they listen to the Knesset and the government, or do they listen to the law, to the court? So that is what I call a showdown, and it could end in violence. It could also end in nothing happening. There's still hope that this will not happen. I think actually that political pressure is growing on Netanyahu, who is not the leader of this. He's more being led by his Minister of Justice and a few other cabinet ministers who are very firmly committed to this reform. I sort of have the feeling he would be happy to be able to stop or at least mitigate this.
Israeli President Isaac Herzog speaking in a surprise address on Thursday, kind of speaking in almost an angry tone there. This week, he's reportedly set to unveil another plan for compromise. What does it mean when the president of the country is giving remarks with strong feelings behind them.
Well, you know, Hamda, in Israel, the president does not have executive authority, but he does have moral authority. He is sort of the father figure of the nation, and that is the role that he tried to play all along, to try and keep everybody happy, find a compromise that would satisfy both sides, bringing people together to talk, for the moment with no success. His only demand, actually, from the government was to freeze the process of legislation just for a while and enable a real discussion between the pros and cons, not under the pressure of the legislative proceedings. That was refused by Yariv Levin, the Minister of Justice. So at some point last week, he became angry and he said, you can't do this. This legislation has to disappear from the face of the earth. That's more or less how he spoke. But in parallel, he continues to bring experts together, experts, I was going to say represent both sides, but they don't really, because none of them has been appointed by either side. There is nobody appointed by the government, and there is no real leadership of the protesters. You could say that the Israeli political opposition represents them, but they don't really. So it's a very, I think it's still a very open question, what will happen.
A lot of demonstrations against this legislation and a lot happening at these protests. They're getting a little violent. They're getting a little bit out of control. The national security minister even firing, wanting to remove, the Tel Aviv police commander. What's next?
Well, they're not really becoming violent. I think that it's a little bit overplayed. There are marginal attempts to break through police cordons, to block roads for an hour or two. Nothing really very violent. But I think that the Minister of Interior Security, of Homeland Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, would like to depict it as becoming violent so that he could use more violent measures to counter them. This issue with the chief of the Tel Aviv district, the police chief of the Tel Aviv district, is the direct result of the interference of politicians who have zero knowledge and experience in policing into what is a very professional thing, which is policing. And it was one of his demands when he signed the coalition agreement, was that he would have oversight over the command of the police, and he would impose his policies. Everybody understood at that moment that that was a formula for a clash, and that clash has happened earlier than we thought.
The opposition leader, Yair Lapid, yesterday saying that perhaps if the country had a constitution, things like this wouldn't happen. In the future of Israeli politics, is that something that could happen, the possibility of a constitution?
Well, I'll give you two answers. Yes, Israel absolutely needs a constitution, and no, this is not going to happen. Everybody knows that Israel needs a constitution for many, many years now, but there are some obstacles, including the relations between religion and state, which will make it virtually impossible. But if we did have a constitution, maybe all this wouldn't be happening.
Daniel Sheck, former Israeli ambassador to France, live in studio with us this morning. Thank you.